The moment they seized her, Emma noticed two things. First, her fingers were stained violet black from the wolfsbane tincture she'd been mixing since before dawn, and in the torchlight of the castle courtyard, they looked exactly like the hands of someone who had been poisoning things. Second, the enormous silver wolf sitting 10 paces away was watching all of this with an expression she could only describe as theatrical boredom. You might want to say something, she thought at him, the way she always thought at animals, not expecting an answer, merely a habit she'd carried since childhood like a worn stone in a pocket. I might, said the wolf.
Or I might wait to see how long it takes you to talk your way out of this without my help.
It's been a dull morning. Emma's blood went cold. In 15 years of speaking wordlessly to horses and hounds and the occasional disgruntled barn cat, not one of them had ever answered back. The wolf, Mark, the Alpha King's legendary guard wolf, the creature every ballad in 3 kingdoms called the Shadow at the Throne, tilted his great silver head. His amber eyes, heavy-lidded and unimpressed, moved from her stained hands to her face. You can hear me, he said, not quite a question. Apparently, she thought back, this is new. For you, perhaps. A pause. The wolfsbane on your hand smells medicinal, not malicious, by the way. Whoever arranged this scene was in a hurry and didn't account for the difference. His tail swept once across the cobblestones, slow and deliberate, just so you know. She would have thanked him, except that Lord Victor was already descending the great stone steps of Aldenmore Keep, and his expression wore the specific satisfaction of a man who had arranged something and was pleased it was unfolding exactly on schedule. Bind her, Victor said. Emma had arrived at Aldenmore Keep 6 weeks ago. She had come on horseback through the first snows of the mountain pass, carrying a satchel of medicinal roots, a worn copy of Thornhill's Compendium of Beast-Tongue Remedies, its spine cracked from years of use, its margins filled with her grandmother's handwriting, and a letter so heavily sealed with royal wax that she'd been stopped 3 times at checkpoints before anyone let her move. The letter said, in precise court language that managed to sound both commanding and desperate, the Alpha King's guard wolf has refused food for 9 days. He permits no healer near him. He has been assessed by the royal physician, the master of hounds, and 2 practitioners of the old craft. All have failed. You are summoned at the king's command to attend at Aldenmore Keep with immediate effect. It was signed with the king's cipher. Not a request. Emma had read it 4 times. Her name had reached the capital 3 years before, carried north by Lord Brennan of the Lower Marches, after she had healed his prize destrier, a horse 4 royal physicians had declared unsalvageable, in 5 weeks of work that none of them had been able to explain to their satisfaction. Lord Brennan had been considerably less interested in the explanation than in the result, and he had an excellent memory for names. When the king's court had run out of conventional options, his name had apparently come up. Emma had thought about the letter for the length of one evening, sitting at her workbench with her grandmother's notes spread around her and the fire burning low. She had thought about what it meant, that a king's guard wolf was refusing food. She had thought about what it felt like to be in pain that no one around you understood. She had thought about a goat she had sat with for 3 nights when she was 8 years old, and how the village healer had said to put it down, and how she had not. Then she had packed her satchel. She had gone. She found Mark in the inner ward, not caged, never caged. The story said he'd destroyed 3 cages on principle, and the king had eventually stopped replacing them. Simply lying in the courtyard snow with his chin on his paws and the demeanor of a creature who had decided to be finished with things. His silver coat caught the pale winter light and gave it back as something colder and more absolute. His paws were the size of a grown man's hand, and the stillness around him was not the stillness of sleep, but of a decision long made and fully settled. He looked at her the way she imagined glaciers looked at things, ancient, cold, completely uninterested in being impressed. She had been warned on the road up from the valley by a gray-haired stable-master who'd stopped her horse at the outer gate. Don't approach quickly, don't crouch, don't offer your hand first. He'd said it with the careful emphasis of someone who had watched others learn these lessons in uncomfortable ways. He is not a dog. He has never been a dog. Whatever he is, it isn't that. Emma had thanked him.
She had filed the information away beside everything else she knew about animals who had been handled badly by people who didn't understand the difference between compliance and trust. She sat down in the snow across from Mark, not beside him, not looming over him, across, at his eye level, where he could see her without lifting his head and she could see him without looking down. She had learned this long ago, that approach mattered more than intention, and that the distance you chose before speaking was itself a language that bodies understood long before minds got involved. They regarded each other. The wind moved between the courtyard walls, carrying cold and the distant smell of pine smoke from the kitchens. Somewhere above them, on the wall walk, a guard shifted his weight against the stone. "I've been told you won't eat," she said. He said nothing. Of course he said nothing. He was a wolf. She reached into her satchel and set a piece of dried venison on the cobblestone halfway between them, not offering it, not extending her hand in the hopeful gesture she'd watched others use with wary animals, the gesture that was really about the person making it, about their need to be received and found acceptable. Just placing the meat in the world, like a fact, and letting it exist there without expectation or demand. "I'm not here to make you eat," she said. "I'm here because someone is worried about you. And that person matters enough that I rode 3 days through snow to sit in this courtyard and be ignored by a wolf." She looked at the stone between them. "I've been ignored by worse things. I can wait." She paused. "Take your time." Mark's amber eyes moved from the venison to her face. They stayed there for a long moment, measuring something she couldn't name and didn't try to. He said nothing, but one ear, very slightly, the barest fraction, a movement so small she might have imagined it, rotated in her direction. She took that as progress. She took out her notebook and began writing her initial observations, and let the silence be what it was. She had nearly given up on the memory of that first voice. She was beginning to think it had been a cold-induced hallucination, the product of 3 days hard riding and too little sleep, when Mark spoke again. It was her 4th day at Aldenmore Keep. She was in the courtyard mixing a compress of yarrow and ground willow bark, the stone cold beneath her knees, her breath making small clouds in the morning air. Mark was lying in his customary spot near the south wall, watching her with that particular intensity that had caused the Newcastle pages to unanimously discover urgent business elsewhere. "You're making something for a joint," he said. She startled so badly she nearly spilled the entire mixture. She looked at her hands, the wolfsbane-stained fingers, still faintly violet at the knuckles. Maybe the tincture had done something. Maybe the cold had cracked something open in her mind. "Stop looking at your hands," Mark said. "You're not going mad." I simply decided to speak. I do things on my own schedule. That's, she thought carefully, arranging her thoughts the way she arranged her medicines. Precisely, with attention to what went where. Very good to know. "The yarrow is correct," he continued, with the air of someone grading a student's work and finding it acceptable, if unremarkable. "But you're missing dried nettle. The inflammation is in the right shoulder, has been for 8 months. The royal physician assumed it was the left because I was favoring it. He was wrong." I didn't bother correcting him. A pause waited with contempt. He smelled like overconfidence and bad wine. Emma stared at him. "You've been refusing food," she said aloud, "because your shoulder hurts." "I've been refusing food," Mark said, with the careful precision of someone who had been misunderstood on this point before and intended to end the misunderstanding now. "Because for 8 months I have been in pain, and not one person has thought to ask me where." The courtyard went very quiet around them. She put down the compress and looked at him, really looked, the way she looked at animals, reading the map of tiny adjustments that told the truth long before any physician's examination could. The way his head tilted, just barely. The way his right foreleg bore fractionally less weight than the left. 8 months of compensating, written into the lines of his body so deeply it had become his shape. "I'm sorry," she said. "No one asked." "No," Mark agreed. "They poked me and wrote things on parchment and told the king I was melancholy." Something in his tone shifted. Old and tired and, somewhere beneath the contempt, genuinely wounded, like a stone with a crack running through it. "I am not melancholy. I am in pain. There is a difference." "Yes," Emma said. There is. She added dried nettle to the compress and moved to sit beside him, close enough to work. He did not move away. She counted that as the second piece of progress and the most significant. "You're not afraid of me," he observed. "Should I be?" The last one they sent was. He smelled of fear and cheap tallow. I made him run. A beat. I might have snapped at his boot. Just a little. "I don't wear boots," she said. "I wear practical shoes." I noticed. A pause. "They're extraordinarily ugly." "Thank you, Mark. That wasn't a compliment." "I know." She began to work, her palms pressed gently against his shoulder, feeling for the deep heat of inflammation the way her mother had taught her. Not forcing, not seeking, simply making her hands available and letting the body's truth rise to meet them. Not magic, more like listening with her skin. "You're actually good at this," Mark said, after a while. The tone was aggressively neutral, as though he were reporting the weather in a city he had no particular feelings about. "The last physician before you jabbed me twice with 2 fingers, and then wrote in his ledger that I was emotionally resistant to assessment." A pause. I bit the ledger. "Just the ledger?" "Mostly the ledger." She had been there 9 days when she heard the footsteps. Not the shuffle of servants or the creak of armored guards. These were precise, measured strikes against stone. The footsteps of a person who moved through spaces as though they had never needed to ask the room's permission. Who had learned long ago that the world arranged itself around certain kinds of presence and had simply incorporated this into how they walked. She was mid-compression, both palms warm against Mark's shoulder, when the wolf spoke without preamble. "He's here," Mark said, in a tone that managed to be simultaneously informative and theatrical, like a stage manager announcing the arrival of the lead actor. "Observe, he's wearing the formal traveling cloak. He hates the formal traveling cloak. The clasps are too heavy on the left shoulder. He's been in the war rooms since before dawn." A pause. "He worries about me. He does it quietly enough that most people miss it. But he's been doing it for 9 days. She didn't have time to process this before Alpha King William of the 5 Marches filled the archway to the inner ward. She had heard descriptions, of course. Every ballad since the Northern campaigns described William Ashbourne in the same sequence of superlatives. The jaw, the height, the eyes that shifted between dark gray and near black depending on the light, the sword arm, the stillness before he spoke that reportedly made veteran commanders instinctively straighten. The ballads had not been exaggerating, which surprised her. Ballads usually did. He was tall and dark-haired, broad through the shoulders, wearing the heavy formal cloak with the expression of a man enduring a minor but persistent inconvenience. His eyes were the gray of deep river water before a storm. And the first thing they moved to, instantly, with an intensity that Emma recognized as fear wearing the mask of composure, was Mark. When the wolf remained still and breathing and not noticeably dying, something in William's face recalibrated. The fear didn't leave entirely. It simply stepped back and let the rest of him take over. Then his gaze moved to her. "You're the healer," he said. His voice was precisely what she'd expected from the ballads, and entirely different in practice. Unhurried, low, carrying the weight of someone who chose their words because they meant them, not because they were expected. "Emma of Thornfield," she said. She didn't stand. She was mid-treatment, both hands still pressed warm against Mark's shoulder, and breaking the work now would cost them 3 days. "I would bow, but I'd rather not lose the compression." One of the guards flanking the archway went visibly rigid at this. William looked at her hands, at Mark's shoulder, at the careful angle of her fingers against the muscle line. "Continue," he said, and came in. He didn't take the formal position at the archway. He moved to crouch beside the courtyard wall, not close, not encroaching on the work, but within clear observation distance. His heavy cloak pooled around him in the snow. He didn't appear to notice. "He's watching your hands," Mark remarked. I noticed. He learns by watching. He always has. A thoughtful pause that Emma was beginning to recognize as Mark at his most sincere. "When I pulled a muscle in the first campaign, he read every text in the Royal Library on animal care. He couldn't treat it himself, but he needed to understand what was being done. He is like that about things that matter to him." Another pause. "Don't tell him I told you. He would find it embarrassing." "What are you doing?" William asked, specifically. "The inflammation is in the right shoulder," Emma said. 8 months, approximately. Your royal physician assessed the wrong side. Mark was compensating, which made the left appear favored and the right appear fine. She pressed gently along the muscle line, feeling for the slow, deep heat she'd been coaxing outward for 4 days. "I'm working the warmth inward. It's not a quick process. You have to remind inflamed tissue what healthy tissue feels like. Coax it back rather than drive it." William went still in the particular way she was already beginning to recognize. A stillness that meant he was reorganizing information rather than simply receiving it. 8 months, he said quietly. Yes. He's been refusing food for 9 days. A pause. Why didn't anyone? He didn't tell them, she said carefully. He told me. She felt Mark's muscles shift very slightly beneath her palms. The wolf equivalent, she was becoming fluent enough to understand, of a satisfied exhale. Kaylin looked at Mark for a long moment. The wolf returned his gaze with the serene self-possession of a creature who had absolutely nothing to feel guilty about. You didn't tell anyone, William said, and the formal register of his voice had dropped away entirely, replaced with something quieter and considerably more human. The voice of a person speaking to someone they loved who had done something frightening. He says, Emma began and stopped. Say it, said William. She looked at Mark. The amber eyes were patient and waiting. He says you have enough wars, she said. He was managing it. William was silent for a long time. The courtyard settled around them. The flicker of a torch, the sound of wind above the wall. That, he said at last, his voice very even, is the most infuriating thing I have heard in 3 years of kingship. Tell him, Mark added, in the tone of someone appending a footnote to a document, that his strategic assessment of the western border is also in need of revision. I have been attempting to communicate this for 2 months, since before you arrived, by staring meaningfully at the western maps whenever he spreads them in my presence. He has not taken the hint. Perhaps you can be more direct. Emma relayed this. William's gray eyes moved from her to Mark and back again with an expression she couldn't quite name, something between rueful and arrested. He told you about the western border. He tells me many things. A long silence. Then, quietly, with the deliberateness of someone deciding to step through a door they hadn't previously acknowledged. What else? He came back the next day, and the day after that. He came in the late afternoon light, after his counsels and his correspondence, arriving in the plain wool doublet he wore when he wasn't receiving anyone formal, his dark hair slightly disheveled from whatever the morning had required of him. He came with the quiet manner of a man who had decided the courtyard was a place where he was allowed to simply exist. He brought texts from the royal library. He asked precise questions about the treatment, about the shoulder's progress, about the old methods Emma had learned from her mother and grandmother, the knowledge that court physicians dismissed as village superstition, while quietly failing to produce results with their own methods. She answered at greater length than she normally would. There was something about his attention that made you want to fill it. Not demanding, not impatient, simply there in the particular way that made the person being listened to feel like the most significant thing in the room. He spread the western border maps on the courtyard stones one afternoon and asked her to relay to Mark exactly where the vulnerability was. Mark pointed with his nose precisely, the river crossing at Brenmark. It floods each spring. The snowmelt from the high passes doubles the volume in the last weeks of frost month. Everyone in the command seems to have forgotten this, which I find remarkable, because I nearly drowned there in the 3rd campaign. It was extremely cold. I do not recommend it. She relayed this, omitting the last 2 sentences. William looked at the map for a long time, his thumb tracing the river line, and then said, very quietly, I need to send a rider tonight. He rolled the map without explanation. He didn't have to give one. The slight easing of his shoulders as he secured it said more than words would have. He carries everything quietly, Mark told her that evening when William had gone. He always has. He believes this is what strength looks like. Mostly, he is right. Occasionally, he is not. What does it look like when he's not, she thought. It looks like riding alone to the eastern watchtower at night when he cannot sleep, believing no one notices. The amber eyes were distant, fixed on something past the courtyard walls. I always notice. For 5 years, I have been the only one who sees all of it. A pause, waited in a way she was learning to pay attention to. Until now, perhaps. She pressed her hands flat against the warm stone and thought about that for a long time. 3 more weeks passed in the shape of small rituals, and the rituals built a world. Mornings, Emma alone with Mark, working the shoulder through its careful progressions as the courtyard filled slowly with pale winter light. The compress changed, the pressure refined, the slow, patient improvement documented in the treatment ledger that Lord James the steward had provided on her second day with the air of a man who expected 1 page and a departure. She had filled 11 pages. He had stopped coming to check. Mark provided commentary throughout. On the quality of the morning light, adequate, though the clouds from the east suggest it won't last. On the castle cook's relationship with salt, aggressive and without nuance. On the political situation with calculated precision. Lord Edmar's secret southern correspondence has been ongoing since autumn. I recognized the wax seal 2 months before you arrived. Whatever he is arranging, it connects to the Eastern tariff dispute. The king should know. Should I tell him? Emma asked. I am reporting, not directing, Mark said. The difference matters. Tell him what I've observed. Let him decide what it means. That distinction, she said, is carrying considerable weight. Most important things do. Afternoons, William came. He came without announcement, in the plain doublet, with books or maps or simply with questions. He listened with the complete unhurried attention of someone who treated other people's knowledge as something genuinely worth respecting. And she found herself talking about the work, about the shoulder's progress, about her mother's goats and her grandmother's margins and the old methods the court physicians had never bothered to understand before dismissing them. She learned things about him in the afternoons, the way you learn things about a landscape by walking through it slowly. He took his tea without anything in it. He tapped his thumb against his knee when he was working through a problem. A small rhythmic movement he appeared entirely unaware of. He had the particular quality of stillness that comes not from being unaffected, but from having trained yourself to be very deliberate about what you showed and when. He was not cold, he was contained. She understood, over those 3 weeks of afternoons, that the difference was significant. She learned that the western border situation had been troubling him for a year, not because of the military vulnerability alone, but because he had trusted the assessment of advisors he now suspected had reason to understate it. He talked about this the way he talked about most things, precisely, without embellishment, watching her face while he spoke in the way of someone who wanted to be understood rather than simply heard. Once she said, without particularly intending to, the inflammation pattern suggests he's adjusted his gait to favor the left for so long it's become default. You'll need to watch for it even after the shoulder heals. He'll forget he doesn't have to compensate. William looked at her steadily. How do we correct it? We, she registered, not you. Not how does the healer correct it. Time, she said, and paying attention. I can do that, he said. He already is, Mark said. He's been paying attention to you for 2 weeks. He does it when he thinks you're looking at me. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm and did not look up from the compress. You, Mark added pleasantly, are doing precisely the same thing. Looking at him when he looks at me. It is extremely symmetrical. I find it both touching and, frankly, time-consuming. I am a wolf with an injured shoulder, not a viewing gallery. You are recovering, Emma said. You have plenty of time to observe things. That is not the point I was making. I know, she said. There was an evening in the 3rd week when the candle had burned to a stub and the courtyard had gone to quiet, and she said something about the Brenmark flood patterns that made William stop mid-sentence and reach for the map he'd brought. He reached across her to unroll it, and his sleeve pulled back, and she saw the scar before she could look away. A long white line running along his inner wrist, jagged, old, made by something blunt and heavy, not a blade. She looked away immediately, not fast enough. The northern pass, he said without inflection, following her gaze to the scar the way a person follows the direction of someone else's eyes, calmly, as though the scar were simply a fact of the landscape. 3 winters ago. She didn't ask. He answered anyway. The bridge had been compromised, and we didn't know it. It gave way during the retreat. Mark pulled me out of the river. He looked at the wolf, who was lying at the courtyard's edge with his chin on his paws and his amber eyes half closed, as though he were barely paying attention, which Emma had learned meant he was paying complete attention. He held on. He got us both to the bank. A pause that carried 3 years inside it. He is the reason I am alive. Tell him, Mark said, and his voice was different now. Quieter, with all the theatrical dryness stripped away, leaving something older and simpler underneath. Tell him I would do it again. Tell him the river was very cold, but he was worth the trouble. Emma's throat tightened in a way she hadn't expected. She delivered the message. William was silent for a long moment. He looked at the scar with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. The measured composure entirely absent, replaced with something that had no armor around it at all. I know, he said very quietly. He always is. The candle burned between them. The wind moved somewhere above the walls. He loves you, Emma said, and because it was late and the night had earned a certain honesty, she added, he worries about you the same way you worry about him. He's simply louder about it, which is impressive, given that you're the only one who can't hear him. William was quiet for a moment. Then, he talks about me? Constantly. He has opinions about your cloak, your border policy, your tendency to skip meals before long councils, and your habit of riding alone to the East Watchtower at night when you can't sleep. The gray eyes moved to her face. He told you that. He tells me everything, she said. And in the candlelit quiet of the courtyard, with Mark's breathing steady as a tide at the edge of the darkness, something shifted in the air between them. Not dramatic, not acknowledged, but present. The way warmth is present even when you're not looking at the fire directly. I'll have to be more careful, William said. Or, she said, stop riding alone to the watchtower at night. The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. That's the other option. Finally, said Mark, from the courtyard's edge. Something approaching a real conversation. Mark stood on all 4 legs without favoring anything on a pale winter morning in the 5th week, and he did it the way truly healthy things do, without thinking about it, without the barely perceptible tilt she had been watching for 5 weeks like a held breath finally released. He simply stood, his great silver head lifted, his weight distributed evenly across 4 paws for the first time in 8 months. And she knew this because she had been measuring it, each morning in the millimeter-level language of weight distribution and compensatory posture that her grandmother had taught her to read the way other people read words. Emma sat back on her heels in the snow and looked at him. She had known the previous Tuesday that they were close. The inflammation had receded to almost nothing under her fingertips, the muscles supple where it had been guarded, the joint cool where it had burned. She had thought, perhaps tomorrow. She had not slept particularly well. Well, Mark said, in the tone of a theater critic who has viewed a long-awaited performance and found it precisely up to standard. Obviously. She laughed. It came out unsteady, half breath, half something that didn't have a name and might not need one. And she was still sitting there on the cold stones, hands in her lap, watching him stand there in the pale morning light with the straightforward unself-consciousness of a creature who had simply reclaimed something that was always his, when she heard the footsteps. William stopped at the archway. He took in the scene. Mark standing, Emma in the snow, laughing quietly to herself. He went completely still in the particular way that meant everything was happening internally and none of it was being shown. He's standing, he said. Yes. He crossed the courtyard and crouched in front of her, which put his face level with hers, in a way she hadn't anticipated, and for a moment they were simply looking at each other in the winter morning light, with nowhere in particular to look away to. You did this, he said. He did most of it, she said. He's extremely motivated by his own dignity. Accurate, Mark confirmed, from above them, with considerable dignity. William looked at her with the gray eyes she had spent 5 weeks learning to read. The controlled, careful expression that habitually showed less than it held, and in this moment was showing considerably more than usual. Something she recognized after 5 weeks of careful attention as relief, so profound it had become something else entirely on its way up through him. "Thank you, Emma," he said, not the healer, not the formal address, just her name and his voice in the cold morning air, simple and direct, offered like something he had decided he meant. She felt it settle into her sternum like a warm coal and stay there, burning steadily and without any sign of going out. "You're welcome," she said. She should have known Lord Victor would move before the month was out. She had known about Victor since the second week. Mark had described him with the casual precision of someone reporting a long-established fact. He has been working against William's authority for 3 years. He moves slowly because he is careful. He is careful because he is dangerous. He prefers to keep his hands clean. A pause. "His hands are not clean. I have known this since before you arrived, and I have been waiting for the moment it could be proven." She had relayed this to William, who had received it with the expression of a man hearing a confirmation of something he'd half known for years, and said, "I suspected. I've never had proof." "You will," Mark had said, and waited. The proof arrived on a cold morning 6 weeks after Emma had first ridden through the mountain pass, in the worst possible way. Her fingers stained violet black from the wolfsbane tincture she'd been using for Mark's shoulder compress. And Lord Victor descending the great steps of Aldenmore Keep with the unhurried certainty of a man executing a plan that had been months in preparation. The Grand Assembly was held every 5 years, all the alpha lords of the 5 marches gathering at Aldenmore Keep with their households and their escort guard animals. Politics dressed as ceremony, tradition pressed into the service of power. Emma's formal role was the pre-assembly health assessment, every guard animal checked, every trained creature cleared. She had been preparing for 3 weeks. She had found the contamination at dawn, purely by instinct. She'd walked past the South Stable's water supply, and something in the smell had been wrong, too sweet beneath the ordinary cold scent of stone and grain. She'd spent nearly an hour replacing the tainted water from the south well before the animals began their morning drink, working in the pre-dawn cold with her hands in the freezing water, the wolfsbane tincture from the shoulder compress staining her fingers as she worked. She had been crouched at the well, examining what remained of the residue, when the shouting began. Victor descended the steps with the measured pace of a man who had rehearsed every word. His voice carried across the gathering yard with the practiced ease of long practice in projection. She had been seen at dawn near the water supply. Her hands bore marks of poison. She had been given extraordinary access to the King's Guard wolf. She had cultivated trust for exactly this purpose. The crowd in the yard, the gathered lords, their households, the castle servants, turned as one body, with the particular collective motion of people who have already decided before they look. Emma stood slowly. She could feel Mark behind her. He had come from his position near the south wall, and she felt his attention settle against her shoulders like a steady hand placed there with intention. "I know what happened," he said. "I was awake before you were. I smelled the contamination before you did. I watched who placed it. I have been watching Victor's household for 2 months, waiting." A pause. This is the moment. Who was it, she thought? Victor's man. Dark cloak, scar beneath the left jaw. He came through the north servant gate at second bell and left through the east passage. Precise, unhurried, certain. He buried the remaining vial behind the farrier's forge, beneath the left cornerstone. I watched him do it. She looked at Victor, still speaking, his voice rolling across the yard with the ease of rehearsed conviction. She looked at William. He was moving through the crowd toward her, not running, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who did not show alarm because he had learned that showing alarm cost you the room. But his gray eyes were fixed on her face, and they were very focused, and she saw, in them, not doubt, not the measuring calculation she'd been learning to read for 6 weeks. He was waiting. He trusts me, she thought. And then, that is the most frightening and the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever done. Then Mark moved. He broke from the yard's edge without warning, in the way that truly large things move when they have decided. Entirely, with a finality that left no room for redirection. He placed himself between Emma and the assembled crowd, planted his enormous paws against the stone, and lifted his great silver head. The sound that came out of him was not a howl. It was older than that, something that belonged to the vocabulary of the first winter, before walls and courts and ceremony had been invented to keep such things at a distance. A sound from before. Every guard animal in the yard answered. The warhounds, the trained wolves from the southern lords' households, the great hunting cats from the eastern delegations. All of them lifted their heads in unison, and the sound they made together moved across the stone yard like weather, like a wave breaking against a shore, and it silenced every human voice in the courtyard with the completeness of a hand pressed over a mouth. "Now," Mark said, "tell them." She turned to face the crowd. Her voice came out steady. She had not expected it to, and was briefly grateful that bodies sometimes knew things minds hadn't settled yet. "Mark is telling me," she said into the silence, "that the south water supply was contaminated at second bell this morning." She looked at Victor. By a man in a dark cloak with a scar beneath his left jaw, who entered through the north servant gate and departed through the east passage. She paused, letting the silence do its work. "The remaining vial is behind the farrier's forge, beneath the left cornerstone." The silence changed quality. Victor's face went the color of old ash. "You're taking the word," he said, his voice finding its shape again through what it cost him. Of my healer," William said. He had stopped moving. He stood in the center of the yard, and his voice had that particular quality Emma had learned to recognize. Not loud, not raised, carrying simply an absolute absence of negotiation. "Who has served this keep for 6 weeks without giving me cause for doubt?" he continued. "Who has done what 4 specialists before her could not?" He looked at Victor with the gray eyes that went near black when the light fell a certain way. "I have had cause for doubt about others. This investigation will clarify the extent of it." He turned to his captain of the guard. "Search behind the farrier's forge, left cornerstone." They found it in 3 minutes. Brown glass, sealed with the distinctive wax of Victor's household correspondence, the same wax Mark had been smelling on the secret letters for 2 months before Emma had ever arrived at Aldenmore Keep. The yard erupted. Victor's man broke within the hour. He gave names. He gave dates. He gave the full architecture of 3 years of careful undermining, using the Grand Assembly as its moment, using Emma as its scapegoat. Lord Edmar's name appeared in the ledger, connected to the Eastern tariff arrangement Mark had described weeks before. The threads were longer than anyone had known, and they ran further than anyone had guessed. The formal proceedings took the rest of the day. Emma answered every question with precision, and stood through all of it, the questions from the King's Council, from the assembled Alpha Lords, from William's captain of the guard, who was thorough and courteous and made her go through the timeline of her dawn work 3 times until every detail was exact and undeniable. She answered the same questions from different mouths without varying her account by a word, because everything she said was simply what had happened, and the truth had the particular quality of things that don't wear out with repetition. At some point during the 3rd hour, someone brought her a cup of hot cider without being asked. She suspected it was Lord James. He had that quality of quiet organizational competence. Mark remained in the great yard long past when he should have been resting. And because he stayed, every guard animal stayed, arranged in a loose semicircle around the proceedings, still and watchful, that the guards had eventually stopped trying to disrupt. After the 3rd attempt met with the combined indifference of 37 animals who had clearly discussed the matter amongst themselves and reached a consensus. "Old custom," Mark said, when she asked, during a brief pause in the questioning. "When a pack member is wrongly accused, the pack stands witness." A pause. Most humans have forgotten it. Mark came to stand beside her, his shoulder warm and solid against her arm. "You did well," he said. "I want that formally acknowledged." "Acknowledged," she said. "Emma." William came across the emptying yard. He had removed his formal gloves. She had learned that this was the equivalent in him of something considerably larger in other people, and he was walking toward her with a directness that had nothing ceremonial about it. The remaining lords were watching. She was fully aware of this. She suspected he was too, and that he had looked at this fact and simply decided it was not relevant to what he was doing. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a moment, the gray eyes that she had 6 weeks of careful observation behind her now, the controlled expression that had shown her, piece by piece, over those 6 weeks, how much more it held than it showed. and in this moment it was showing considerably more than usual. Something she recognized in the specific vocabulary of William Ashbourne's face as certainty. Then he took her hand. Not a formal gesture, or not only that. His fingers closed around hers, warm and certain, in the way of someone who has made a decision and finished making it. The way you hold something you have no intention of putting down. The position of Royal Bestiary Keeper, he said. His voice was even, and it carried. The title has been vacant since my father's reign. I'm appointing you to it today. A murmur moved through the watching lords like wind through a field. The position carries full authority over the Royal Guard animals, the breeding program, all creature care and assessment. It includes standing advisorial access to the Royal Council. A pause. Including the right to present, on the record, any intelligence gathered through direct communication with the King's Guard animals. He's making it official, Mark said, in the tone of a theater critic who has finally seen a performance worth attending. Everything I've told you becomes formally admissible. Another pause, shorter. I have considerable thoughts on the Eastern Tariff dispute and Lord Edmar's involvement. I look forward to presenting them in a proper venue. Lord James, the Chancellor, small and sharp-faced and perpetually carrying the expression of a man who had been awake since before sunrise and expected to remain so until well after dark, appeared at William's shoulder with the silent efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. He produced a small silver token on a dark ribbon, the mark of the Aldenmore royal house, a wolf's profile engraved on silver so fine she could see the fur's texture. William took it. He looked at her. This is not a reward, he said, quietly, and she understood this part was for her alone. The rest of the ceremony arranged for the watching audience, this particular sentence placed directly between them. It's recognition. There is a difference. I know, she said. He placed the token in her free hand and folded her fingers around it. He didn't let go of her other hand. Finally, Mark said, with the warm, expansive satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for a very long time and is now being proved comprehensively right. Someone is doing something sensible. She went to check on Mark before the formal dinner, because she always would. Royal Bestiary Keeper or not, council appointment or not, the shoulder still needed its evening assessment. The venison tonight is overcooked, Mark informed her, with the certainty of a creature who had evaluated many dinners and held strong positions on all of them. I can smell it from the south courtyard. Whoever is directing that kitchen is operating without adequate discipline. The garlic in particular is being used aggressively and without purpose. I'll pass that along, she said. I won't hold my breath. He regarded her with the amber eyes that had been, since the first day, the most honest eyes in Aldenmore Keep. You are nervous about the dinner. I'm not nervous. You are doing the thing with your hands where you don't know what to do with them. He was correct. She was. He will be beside you. He has been beside you since the third day. He simply took 6 weeks to formalize the arrangement. The evening will be exactly what it is. A pause. Stop arranging your hands and go. She looked at the wolf. You could have mentioned any of this sooner. I could have, Mark agreed, without a trace of apology. But it was considerably more interesting to observe it developing. I have limited entertainment options in this courtyard. Don't begrudge me the small pleasures. She laughed and walked to the great hall. The formal dinner occupied a different world from anything in Emma's experience. Candlelight arranged for maximum political legibility, a seating order that encoded 3 years of alliance and grievance into proximity and placement, wine from the southern territories that cost more than her family's cottage, venison that was, precisely as Mark had assessed, somewhat overdone. William was beside her. He had the quiet habit, she noticed now that she was paying close attention, of leaning fractionally toward her when someone at the table required a response. Not visibly, not enough for any other observer to note it, but enough that she felt it each time. The small, consistent weight of being consulted, of being the person who's read on things he wanted before he spoke. It was a small thing. She noticed it every single time. Lord James appeared at her elbow after the formal portion dissolved into something resembling an actual gathering of human beings. He carried a glass of amber wine and the expression of a man delivering a verdict he had been composing for some time. "For what it's worth," he said, "I spent 3 years building a case against Victor." He looked at his glass with the air of a man recalibrating his professional self-assessment. "A wolf beat me to it." "In a single season." "Mark is very observant," Emma said. "Apparently." He glanced across the hall toward William, who was with 2 of the Northern lords, attending to them with the same complete focus he gave to everything he had decided mattered. James looked back at her. "He's been different since Mark started recovering, since you arrived." He raised his glass, a small, precise increment. "Welcome to the council, Royal Keeper." He walked away before she could respond. Later, when the hall had become a warm din of voices and the candles had burned lower, she found William on the eastern battlement. The night was clear and very cold. Below, Aldemore Keep glowed warm against the dark, torches burning in their brackets, the sound of the dinner muffled and golden through the fixed stone walls. Above, stars pressed close and brilliant over the snowfields, the way they only do when the air is completely clear and the cold has driven everything else away. She stood beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The wind moved between them, carrying cold stone and pine and the distant clean smell of the northern forest in winter. "You knew," she said finally, "before today, about Victor, about the extent of it." "I suspected Victor for a long time," he said. "I didn't have proof. I couldn't act on suspicion alone." He looked out at the dark forest. "Mark had proof. He'd been watching for 2 months before you arrived, accumulating it. And then you came, and he had someone to tell it to." A pause. "I should have found a way to hear him sooner. I should have asked him about the shoulder sooner. I should have asked him about a great many things sooner. He's been trying to tell me, and I didn't." He stopped, exhaled slowly. "I didn't have you." The night settled around them. "You're not angry," she said. "That it came through me? That it wasn't your guards, your council, your own intelligence?" He turned to look at her. "Why would I be angry? Some men would be, finding that a healer from a village in the hills knew things their entire apparatus missed. Some men," he said very evenly, "are idiots." She laughed, genuine, quiet, surprised out of her, and saw the corner of his mouth move in response. The controlled almost smile she had catalogued in its several varieties over 6 weeks of careful observation. This one was the rarest, the one that reached his eyes and changed their color. "I don't know how to do this," she said after a moment. "The council, the politics, all of it." She looked out at the keep below, warm against the winter dark. "I'm a healer from Thornfield. My mother kept goats. I learned everything I know from a woman who learned it from her mother in a village that hasn't changed in 3 centuries. I don't know the first thing about court." "I'll teach you what I can," he said. "James will cover the rest, and you already know how to read a room. You learned it from 6 weeks of listening to an animal who has watched every room in this keep for 5 years without anyone knowing he was paying attention." He paused. "You have better intelligence than my entire council has produced in 3 years. We'll build from that." She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, and because she was tired of being careful, and the night was cold, and he had held her hand in front of every lord of the 5 marches without a moment's hesitation, and because Mark had pointed out, with complete accuracy, that she had been looking at William when he looked at Mark since approximately the 3rd day, she leaned up and kissed him. He went still for exactly 1 heartbeat. Then his hand came to her jaw, warm and certain and unhurried, and he kissed her back with the same complete, undefended attention he gave to everything he had decided genuinely mattered. "About time," said Mark from somewhere far below in the courtyard. His voice carried the warmth of something that was not quite smugness and not quite satisfaction. The wolf equivalent, she thought, of a smile so deep it had become structural. "I've been waiting since the 3rd day. My shoulder may be healed, but my patience has limits. I want that noted." 3 days later, Emma walked into the royal council chamber for the first time as royal bestiary keeper. The table was long and dark and very old, its surface worn smooth by decades of hands that had made decisions here. 24 chairs arranged around it,
23 already occupied by men who had been occupying them for years. Lords and advisors and commanders, men whose names appeared in the historical chronicles she had occasionally read by candlelight in her grandmother's house, never imagining she would one day share a table with them. She was the 24th. The room smelled of candle wax and cold stone and old wood, and the particular blend of authority and anxiety that accumulated in rooms where important things were decided. She had noticed this smell in the keep's great hall and in William's war room, and now here, and she supposed she was going to have to get used to it. She took her seat without hurry. She arranged her notes on the table in front of her, observations on the Eastern Passage, the flood records Mark had helped her reconstruct from his 5 years of watching William study maps, the specific details of Lord Edmar's correspondence pattern. Today's primary topic is the Eastern Tariff Dispute, which connects, as you may already know, to Lord Edmar's recent correspondence. He paused, with the careful emphasis of someone delivering useful intelligence. Lord Harwick will oppose whatever you say, not on grounds of substance, on grounds of who you are and how you arrived here. Thought you should know before you begin. Mark mentioned him, Emma said. He said Harwick interrupted the king 4 times in last week's session and attributed each interruption to poor acoustics in the chamber. She looked across the long table at the heavy-set lord in question, already clearing his throat in the preparatory manner of a man who had composed his objections before the meeting opened and was eager to deliver them. A man who can't hear because he's too busy talking isn't worth fearing. The corner of James's mouth lifted, sharp and brief and quickly suppressed. He said nothing. At the far end of the table, William's gray eyes found hers. Just for a moment, a fraction of a second, the small, controlled movement at the corner of his mouth that she had spent 6 weeks learning to read, that she could now read as clearly as print on a page. "Begin," said Mark's voice in the back of her mind, warm and steady and carrying something she recognized with a small shock of startled feeling as unmistakable pride. "Show them what a woman who listens to wolves can see. Show them what I already know." Emma looked at Lord Harwick and smiled pleasantly. "Lord Harwick," she said, "let's begin with the Eastern Tariff situation, shall we? I have some observations about the Brenmark Passage and the river flooding patterns that I believe will be directly relevant to your position. I also have some thoughts on Lord Edmar's Southern correspondence that may somewhat reframe the question before us." She folded her hands on the table, her grandmother's careful posture, her mother's steady voice. "I'd welcome your response." Harwick blinked. His mouth, which had been opening to deliver the first of his precomposed objections, remained briefly where it was. "Obviously." Outside the high windows of the council chamber, the snow had softened to something closer to light, the way snow changes in the last weeks of winter, when it stops being a weight the world must carry and becomes instead a kind of brightness, a reflection of the sun returning. The morning was cold and clear and very wide, the way mornings are in the high keeps when the worst of the season has turned. Aldenmore Keep settled around them all, the wolf in the courtyard below, warm in the winter sun, the woman at the council table unfolding her notes, the king at the far end of the table, watching her begin with the gray eyes that had been watching her since the 9th day, that would keep watching. Mark's shoulder had healed, and everything that had broken open to let the healing in had healed into something stronger than what was there before. The way bone does, the way the body does, the way things do when someone finally, takes the time to ask where it hurts. As it always had, as it always would. The Wolf Who Was Never Heard, a story about listening. At its heart, this isn't really a story about a princess, a king, or even a talking wolf. It's a story about pain that goes unnoticed, simply because no one thought to ask the right question. For 8 months, Marcus suffered in silence, not because he couldn't communicate, but because no one around him knew how to listen. The royal physician misread his symptoms. The court mistook his withdrawal for melancholy instead of agony. Even William, the man who loved him most, who would have moved mountains for him, missed it. Not from carelessness, but because some kinds of pain are invisible unless someone teaches you how to see them. Then Emma arrives, and what makes her remarkable isn't magic or destiny, it's patience. She sits across from Marcus, not above him. She offers without demanding. She waits without pressuring.
She gives him room to speak in his own time, on his own terms. And when he finally does speak, she does the only thing that truly matters. She believes him. That's the quiet center of this whole story. Not the romance, not the political intrigue, not even the wolf's witty, biting commentary, though all of that gives the story its charm and its heartbeat. That line could describe medicine. It could just as easily describe trust, grief, or any relationship that's been quietly hurting for longer than anyone admitted. By the end, what heals isn't just a shoulder. It's a kingdom built on assumptions finally being corrected. It's a king learning that vulnerability and strength aren't opposites. It's a wolf who spent 5 years being the only one who saw everything, finally getting to be seen in return. And it's a woman from a small village discovering that the thing she always thought was unremarkable, simply sitting still and paying attention, was, all along, a kind of magic the whole world had forgotten how to practice. The lesson is simple, even if living it is hard. People you love are often telling you exactly what they need. The problem is rarely that they're silent. The problem is that we haven't learned to sit close enough, long enough, gently enough, to hear them. If you've ever been the one nobody heard, or the one who finally learned how to listen, tell us about it in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, hit subscribe so we can keep telling the ones that matter. Thank you for being here.